everybody. Michael Robbins in Uvalde Hesperian, and I'm talking with Fred Fugere, and he is two things. He is a airline pilot, and he is also an author. And I wanted to take a moment to talk to Fred. We've had some aviation news recently, and thought it'd be a good opportunity from somebody that does this day in and day out, what their thoughts were, just flying in general, and so forth. So welcome. It's nice to talk to you. Finally see a face. I guess my first question, and I think I brought it up yesterday when we were on the phone, is what when the DCA accident happened, what were kind of your reactions, thoughts? I think you had mentioned you don't fly into that airport that often, but you may be a little familiar with it.
Familiar with it. You're right. It's not one of my normal stopping grounds. One of our bigger hubs is Washington Dulles, which is out in Virginia, just west of there. But we do fly into DCA. I've been in there many times, landing both directions. It's a very busy airport. It's a highly touted airport, especially by those that work in and around the Beltway there, because it's very convenient. It's right there on the Pacific, and so I'm familiar with it. I know it's busy. There's that military side of it, stuff coming in out of Andrews and some other bases around there that adds some element of difficulty. But the controls have always been very good. The approaches are very straightforward. There's a lot of restricted areas there. So the typical routing, especially if you're landing south, now they were landing north, but you just follow the Potomac. If the weather allows that, you don't have to do an instrument approach. It's a bit of a curved approach, but it's very straightforward, very well laid out, and crews are highly trained that go into there. So yeah, it was tragic to hear that news. Absolutely heart-wrenching. I just can't imagine how something like that could happen, but it did. And so there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. My first thought is with the airline guys, they were on about a half-mile final, so they were cleared to land, and they were in that process of just the finishing touches of the landing process. So I think they were the ones who were hit, is my understanding of it. And there's some see and avoid stuff going on there with the chopper and going through that airspace. There's controller guidance and involvement, but again, not both airplanes. The aircraft does have TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, but the chopper, to my understanding, does not. So that system, that's kind of a fail-safe, kind of a safety net, if you will, would tell the pilots either climb or descend. That did not work, only because it couldn't work, because the chopper was not a correspondingly talkative aircraft, if you will, with that same system. So if it was a see and avoid at night, it's a little trickier. If they were wearing NVGs, which I've heard they might have been, that changes things a little bit because it limits their field of view. So it's a confluence of events. Usually it's a chain of events, and if one of those things breaks, happen. So there's a lot of questions. I don't have any answers yet, but it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic, and I feel for those families.
I do as well, and I think the whole nation does. I would like to think, and I do have every confidence that the National Transportation Safety Board, all those that are involved in the investigation, that will spend a great amount of time and effort looking at every piece of the puzzle, trying to get to the bottom of it to get some answers for everybody. So yeah. So anyway, so then we had the one this morning, and you were mentioning takeoffs and landings, and tell me a little bit about takeoffs in general. Takeoffs are a very critical time usually.
It is, the pilot, it is the most critical phase of flight in my world. It's your heaviest, you're fully fueled, you're at your most flammable, if you want to look at it that way. So performance can be an issue. And when the airplane is heavy, lighter things fly better than heavier things. And if you lose an engine at a critical moment, shortly after your decision, your go, no go speed, we call it the V1 speed. Any aircraft or engine malfunction below that speed, you abort. You have enough runway in the computations to safely stop. You get an engine failure above V1 speed, you're committed to the takeoff, and the performance allows you to go. And that's assuming a simple single engine failure, no other complications. And in theory, you have enough performance to come back around and avoid terrain and come back around and preferably land at the airport you took off from. But sometimes there are other options as well. Now, what happened to them, I don't know. I do know it was shortly after takeoff. And again, having had some issues, throughout my 35-year career, both military and civilian, I know that the most critical ones were the ones shortly after takeoff. You've got some decisions to be made. The aircraft doesn't perform that well. You're very heavy.
Sure.
And hopefully you have some options. I don't know what happened to them, but apparently they didn't have any options. I don't know if I think they at least lost an engine, that Learjet there taking off out of North Philadelphia. But if there were any other complications, or if they had, multiple engine problems, maybe a flock of birds, Sully comes to mind. When they took off out of LaGuardia, a flock of geese,
Bird strike. Yeah.
Both engines, bird strikes, went out, and they had no options. He couldn't make Teterboro, he couldn't make anything. And fortunately, the Hudson was there, and we call it the miracle on the Hudson. But that could have been tragic.
Sure.
Tragic. If there had been an undercast, if he couldn't have seen the river to be able to belly flop and essentially, water land in the Hudson, I'm not sure anyone would have survived. So it could have been a situation like that last night, and I don't know. But again, awfully horrible, tragic news to get something like that right on the heels of the DCA crash.
Sure. And I kind of want to segue, but before I do, I just want to mention, and I'd heard somebody else this morning, a commentary, say this, and it said it's unfortunate and kind of odd that you had this coincidental two crashes right together. But I think a lot of people, some people might be a little shaken and think, okay, is flying that safe? And I don't think it's really, from what I understand, changed the equation of overall flying and the safety of it. I mean, the long record of it.
Absolutely. We fly, I think if you look at FlightAware, any of those programs, thousands of flights just domestically every single day. And there's nary a problem. I mean, occasionally there's a divert for something, or maybe a hydraulic problem, but everybody survives, and there's not an issue. It doesn't even make the news. This tragedy in DCA 2 days ago was the biggest accident since, my understanding, since 9/11. And we know 9/11 really wasn't an accident. That was a terrorist act. So,
right.
You'd have to go even further back to find the last accident that took that many lives. So no, statistically, it is very, very safe. And I to the flying public, I would extol you to not lose faith in the system, and not be afraid to fly, because it is safe.